That's the start of my downfall. Your drinks ended up in a cave.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. A big Thursday welcome to the Pagabo Live Pavilion. It's the last day. Is everyone's feet all right? No, mine aren't. I'm really glad I'm sitting down. So we're here this morning for a Decarbonisation Hackathon. So a hackathon, what on earth is a hackathon? I'm not too sure, to be quite honest, but we're going to hack it anyway. We've got a few questions. We have commissioned a white paper on decarbonisation within the public sector to try and understand a little bit more about how the public sector are progressing towards their net zero plans, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, how procurement's really helping that. Obviously, from our perspective, that's our bag. That's where we live and breathe. So we're hoping to share a little few stats and figures from that research that we've done so far. We will be using some of the feedback, insights, innovations from the room today to feed into the findings of the white paper as well, which will be published really soon, which we'll share with you all that's attended today as well. So yeah, looking forward to get going. We've got an interesting round table in the middle. We're really looking for participation around the room as well. So any questions and stuff, we're going to take questions at the end. If you've got anything burning that you want to say or add, please stick your hand up and we've got a roaming mic that's going to come around as well. So welcome. I'm going to pass to we'll all need to be using the microphones around the table, so we'll have to share. We haven't got enough. But if you can grab a microphone and just do a quick round of introductions so we all know who we're talking to. Tom.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Tom Retallick, so Senior Decarbonisation Framework Manager for Pagabo.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Katie Harris. I'm Pre-Construction Director from SEDM.
I can use this one here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ian Watson. I'm the Director of Lending in the Local Authority team at the National Wealth Fund.
Good morning, everyone. Justin Olosunde. I'm the Senior Finance and Investment Manager at the West of England Combined Authority and the Finance Lead for the DESNZ-funded Local Net Zero Accelerator Programme.
Morning, everybody. Probably a bit of an imposter around this table, I think. Simon Hodson from JLL. I ran our London development business for 15 years, and over the last 2 or 3 years have been really focusing on embedding sustainability into our core advice to clients across the residential and living business predominantly.
Morning, everyone. Liam Gillard, Senior Programme Manager at Salix, so predominantly involved in the delivery of the public sector decarbonisation scheme.
Morning, everyone. My name's Kelly Cruz. I'm National Head of Decarbonisation for Willmott Dixon. So I head up the Decarbonise Today service within that organisation.
Morning, everybody. David Dunne. I'm the Chief Officer of Strategic Place Planning at Aberdeen City Council. So amongst lots of other boring local government things, I'm also responsible for the council's net zero journey.
Excellent, thank you all. So we'll launch into a few questions. We're going to play a little game of higher or lower as well, because I think, I don't know about everyone else, but we'll probably need a little bit something different than listening to people waffling on to us all day. So some of our results from these questions are really based around some of the main points of feedback that were had within the survey that we've carried out. So obviously it's up for conversation. It's maybe some of the figures and things in here might be a bit of a surprise, or it might be exactly what you would expect to be seeing. So we'll see what the thoughts are around the room. So first question, based around Keir Starmer has announced that a fresh climate change targets at COP29, saying that the UK will now aim for 81% cuts in emissions by 2035. The question posed, do we believe that Keir Starmer's new target is achievable by 2035? So higher or lower, our survey says. Hands up if we think it was higher. People saying yes, it is achievable. Is it higher than 50%? Resounding no around the table. Few optimistics. 25% of our survey of 171, I should have said that earlier, 171 responses, 25% said yes, it's achievable in the time frames. So varying degrees of positivity following that. But yeah, discussion around the table. Who would like to pick up on that? Is it achievable? What do we need to do to make it achievable?
Okay, Okay, I guess someone's got to start, so I'll start. I think what I would say is that the public sector cannot decarbonise in isolation. We need to be able to drive private capital in to do the work with us. At the moment, there's a significant development finance gap in terms of assisting local authorities to bring projects to market to assist in decarbonisation. They need support working alongside with industry to be able to implement local industrial decarbonisation plans, local area energy plans, and the local growth plans. Until we address that development finance gap, until we address that shortfall, we will not be able to drive the private capital and we will not be able to hit those targets. I'd like to hand over to my colleague Ian from the National Wealth Fund, though, on the basis that we need to see a remit from either NWF or GB Energy that enables them to empower us to do the work with industry. Ian.
Thank you, Justin. So there's a number of things there, I guess, that you just threw at me. And we do work with Justin and his team, so that's not totally unexpected. So you're right. You know, we were talking earlier on about how we still feel we're on a journey that, you know, we should have been starting 10 or 15 years ago in terms of working with authorities. And I guess part of the challenge from the local authority point of view, there's been an expectation that they will just rock up and they'll do it themselves and they'll build the teams. And there's a number of times I've spoken over the course of this event in the last 3 days, 3 days, to say they're just facing so many other challenges there economically and everything else that's going on, budget cuts, etc., that actually quite often the local authority teams are working the other way, so they're getting smaller. Justin and his team are doing a great job to fill in the gaps there and going around and sharing knowledge. But it's not just a question of his team. I think there's a combination of skilling up as well. So we're definitely suffering from a huge skill shortage at the development stage, but also going forward to the implementation stage. So that is massive. We can't necessarily solve that at the National Wealth Fund, but what we can do, from my point of view, is we are working really closely with industry and with local authorities to try and understand the gap, to fill in some of the pieces there. Hopefully the local energy plans and the local growth plans are not going to be plans that take 5 years, because we're just basically never going to get there. So actually, how do you accelerate these things and how do you move them forward faster and actually do things at the front of the pipeline? So rather than waiting until you've finished your plan, what's at the front end of the pipeline and how do we do that? Also, as part of that, I think, is recognising that you can't just finance all through grant. Sorry, it ain't going to happen. There's not enough grant. So Justin's point about blending in finance there. But not just doing the easy things first through grant, having a blend and going, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, so for example, we've been working with West Suffolk and we've done a net zero fund there where they have a programme over 4 years to decarbonise, and they're mixing in things like rooftop solar, EV charging, EV fleet, LED lighting, retrofits. So some things that they don't make any money on, but they've taken a view that they'll do it as part of a programme, and cash flowing that over the 20 years or whatever, they actually make a return, or it's forecast to do that. So we need to actually deliver that. But that's a really good way of doing it, to blend grant in, to blend the private finance in, but do it in a bundled way so you can get to scale and attract private sector finance. And that's just at the smaller end of the scale. There are other larger ones. It's tricky just now, so we are finding it tricky to get private capital in to do the development stage, as Justin says. You can do it on some of the larger projects where you actually blend some of the development into the overall cost of it. And I think that's probably the key to get to scale and to actually be able to use some of the development finance. You speak to the Greater Manchesters, etc., and they are doing that. So they're actually investing into the project and making a return off the ones and taking a development fee for doing it and actually doing the recycling. So I think there's an element there as well about how we structure the programme and we bundle and we start to recycle. But just doing the development finance per se on its own, I think, is really tricky.
So I suppose just to back up Justin in terms of that local government piece, I myself and Ian have also spoken. Ian has probably spoken to every local government in the UK at this stage, but I would echo the thing I think that keeps me awake at night is more the skills side. As a local authority, to give you a sense of scale, we've got about 100 sort of non-domestic buildings, schools, school estates, swimming pools, etc., you name it, all the high-end sort of energy uses. On top of that, we've got 23,000 council houses in the city. That's, that would bankrupt the city council to try and take on that sort of scale of decarbonisation. But I think there are opportunities out there. My worry is that we're not doing it in a sort of a considered, planned approach. It's very haphazard. It's very hit and miss. So interestingly, Liam, through Salix, for example, our headquarters building, we've just invested 2.7 million in putting LED lighting in. It's going to save us £300,000 a year. You can do the maths on that. It works. But I think, to your point, Ian, there's a large part of our estate where there won't be a return. Retrofitting housing, for example, in terms of energy bills, it's just never going to have a return. But I think it is that blend. We've got opportunities around battery storage, around rooftop solar, etc., etc. We're still in the process of trying to talk GB Energy to come and share the building with us. If we can manage to do that, maybe they'll pay for some of it. I doubt it, but we can but try. But I do think we're 70% of our budget is tied up in education and social care, so it's effectively ring fenced. So all of our cuts come out of that 30%, which does everything from building management to net zero. So I do worry that we do need a more strategic approach at a national level to help, particularly smaller local authorities. We're quite lucky. We're quite a big local authority, but a lot of smaller ones, to actually get the skill sets to know where to go. And can it be replicated? Do we all have to reinvent the wheel every time, or can we actually produce a framework which other local authorities can buy into almost?
Excellent points. Very nice segue to question 2 as well. So the Climate Change, excuse my voice, I'm losing it. Climate Change Act in 2008, that specified that the UK must meet net zero by 2050. So England, Wales and Northern Ireland are specified to meet by 2050, while Scotland has set its own targets to be aiming to become net zero by 2045. Why? So one of the questions posed within our survey was, where do you feel, obviously to the public sector, where do you feel that you are in your current organisation's net zero journey? Or to our wider colleagues, where are you seeing that the public sector are in their journey? Those who said we're ready, we have an up-to-date action plan, we're fully embracing all opportunities to achieve net zero to target. Around the room, higher or lower than 40% are saying they're ready to go and they've got a plan. Hands up for higher. Correct. We're at 17% of those surveyed saying they feel like they're ready to go. So bringing in our contractor colleagues around the room, what are we seeing? How do we, for those public sector organisations that don't have a plan or that have a bit of a plan, I think to your point, we need, well, to everyone's points that we've made within question 1, it's not all about just having funded. We can't be relying on funding to be funding absolutely everything. That doesn't make any sense. But when we've got such tight budgets, we've got ring-fenced aspects to our capital budgets within local authorities. How do we actually develop a plan without reinventing the wheel all the time that's actually going to deliver anywhere near towards this?
So I think, my voice is starting to go as well, I'm sick of hearing myself talk this week. I think in terms of the key areas that I find when we're talking with the public sector, one of the biggest challenges is basically what we've discussed before there around the actual resources in-house to have the time to develop plans. I think the other fundamental part of it is the accuracy and access to data to be able to make them informed decisions and plans. So I think one of the key things is really understanding where customers' data currently sits and how accurate that is, which will then allow them to develop more informed strategies and plans. I think a lot of customers are, have set net zero targets and the ambition to get there is there and the passion's there to get there. But there's a number of obstacles that they've got to navigate. And I think one of the key ones, apart from funding, which is obviously a major challenge, is where do we start on this journey? How do we prioritise the buildings? Which building comes first? And why are we choosing that? And I think if a customer starts getting more accurate information and data through, then they can use that to start aligning to the wider capital programme of works. They can align that more to in terms of where there's opportunity to invest to save, and I think that's where they can develop the strategies on the back of that that could justify the financial injection into that development of a strategy, because the return will come back through the efficiencies and the measures that that would drive going forward. Yeah.
And just to follow up on that and to sort of come back on your question, I think we work regionally, so we work in the North West and the Midlands, and we see a real disparity between the different local authorities that we do work with in terms of where they are in their planning and where they are in their maturity, I suppose, in their journey to net carbon zero. And to pick up again on the skills point as well, linked to that, we do employ tradespeople, so I think we're probably one of the last contractors that does have direct trades. We've got about 200 tradespeople working for us, and as a result of that we train them and we employ apprentices, but we can only do that with that consistency of workload ahead of us. So we need the strategy, we need the plan, we need then the pipeline, which isn't a transactional pipeline that's done on an annual funded basis, so that you can't plan ahead and you can't see what's coming in the future. To employ an apprentice, you need 3-5 years of work for them to get the amount of training that they need to do the job that they do. And we want to keep on employing apprentices, and apprentices want to work for us. We had 2,500 applicants to 20 places this year, and that's just in our region. So there are people that want to work in our industry, and we need to be able to offer them those jobs.
I was just going to say, following on from what has both been said, I think from a Salix perspective, obviously working across England, also Scotland and Wales, we do see a huge variation in how public sector bodies are prepared for investing, and sort of their pipeline can be highly varied or limited, and I think that's where there is the real challenge, and that's what we see across the public sector. I think what's encouraging is that we are starting to see more longer term, more whole building, rather than what's been in the past of a bit more isolated energy efficiency measures being put in. So I think there is the positive aspect there.
Hi there, Paul Broadbent from Located. Arm's length body to the Department for Education, working on the GB Energy programme to decarbonise 200 schools in the UK over the next year. I think, you know, from a national perspective, we're talking about skills, we're talking about shifting next generation, we're talking about education, we're talking about a strategic approach to decarbonisation. Well, in my view, looking at the public estate, the largest public estate is the school estate. So of 80 million square metres, it touches 12 million pupils, 43% of UK households have got school-aged children. If we're going to decarbonise any estate first, it does to me seem blindingly obvious we start with our schools. It's the estate which is open to all. It has the opportunity to break down barriers to opportunity and also to deliver the clean energy mission of the UK government. I think in terms of the finance challenge, a lot of the schools are multi-academy trusts. You know, we've got over 3,000 MATs in the country. Most of the banks which work with those trusts are open to innovative finance models, to PPAs, to sleeving agreements, to innovative funding sources. And from our discussions with those banks, they're quite open to kind of innovative approaches to delivering net zero. In my own view, we need a national picture to say, well, actually, which estate are we going to lead into first? Where are we going to decarbonise first? We need focus. In my own view, obviously, I am biased towards schools, but you know, I do feel that if we could at least get every school in Britain to net zero, that would be a huge achievement, and the impact of that could be stratospheric in terms of delivering green skills, learning, and also I think the school as a kind of building model in the fact that it's kind of underused during summer holidays, during when the obviously solar PV is peak periods. We could build community energy through that as well, and also deliver climate education and get, you know, engagement across communities. So I think at the moment it seems to me that there's quite a piecemeal approach to kind of different regions, focusing on different kind of projects, and actually there's an opportunity to say, well, actually, which estate are we going to focus on, and how are we going to link that together as a kind of broader strategic piece? Not forgetting that, to actually achieve the target, we're looking at kind of decarbonising, over 800 schools a year to reach the target. So we need to get from our position now, which is, frankly, not even anywhere close to that figure, to a pretty significant scale quite quickly.
Excellent, thank you. That's great. I'm just a couple of comments, Liam and Ian, on that. Is there any sort of strategy behind that with different funding phases and waves of funding that comes out? There tends to be some sort of category, if you like, within that certain wave. Is that something that we can look at? Could government do a little bit more around that?
So I think there is the potential there. I guess on the public sector decarbonisation scheme, there is currently sector soft caps, so that is where it enables a fair distribution across NHS, education, local authorities, so it splits sort of in thirds, and currently that's the sort of policy position that has been used, and that's what's followed through in the allocation of funding. So that's the current sort of model in place, and yeah, that's what we're currently working against. But there is continuing to be feedback, but as you can imagine, there'll be different opinions on different sides of each sector.
Is this working still? That's good. Great. So I actually think it's a great idea. I think it's really, really smart to do large scale, whether it's schools or MOD or NHS. If you can do all of them, even better. I do question when you talk about multiple banks, because I think you've got to be careful how you bundle that, because the banks will, again, back to my opening points about wanting scale, about doing these things, and the contractors will want the same thing as well, So is there a way to cut the country into X amount of chunks and to do it that way? You'll still have to cut through the academies and the PFI schools, etc., but it's not beyond the wit of people around the table and in this room to do that. But doing a multi-program like that, where you're blending in rooftop solar and doing the decarbonisation energy efficiency of the schools, I think is a really smart thing to do. I guess we've been trying to do it for so long, but if we can do it, whether it's through GB Energy, we're happy to look at it as well in terms of getting scale there. There's ways which we can do it, and we can start to bring in funders within the market. But if you did something where you almost had like a big UK solar fund, for schools, I think that would be really, really good.
Absolutely. There you go. An idea's been born. It's in the white paper.
So I would agree with Paul. I think it was to give a sense of context. So 70% of our emissions come from buildings. That's not residential. That's just, I'm going to call them non-residential buildings. So that will be predominantly schools in our case. But I think to the earlier point as well around multi-year funding, we've got a capital program which involves, for example, we've an academy underway or in the planning stage at the moment. They're touching on 120 million now to build. For some local authorities, that'll be an entire capital plan. That'll be everything they have just to build that. So I do think that multi-year funding, and to know that it's guaranteed and that it's going to come, because we suffer, as lots of other public bodies do, with this, ever-increasing rounds of, here's some funding for this year. By the way, we'll give it to you in June, and you have to spend it by the end of the financial year. So I do think we need a much more programmed approach, and I think the scale, to your point, Ian, I think if we could do this, from a Scottish perspective, if we could do it at a Scottish-wide scale, because that's the sort of scale that we need to move these things forward in terms of a program. I think that'd be something that would help local authorities to buy into it, because I think at the moment the concern is we've got enough with just trying to maintain, in our case, a significant Victorian school estate. Just trying to keep those warm and dry is a challenge enough. So I do think it's, almost post-Second World War, housing sort of scale of delivery is what's required here across a range of sectors, but it does need a national support. I don't think, local authorities by themselves can deliver this.
I was just going to add. Excuse me. I was just going to add to that in terms of what Paul was saying around the schools being, they are community hubs, and that's where you get a lot of footfall. And I think one of the big challenges, apart from what we've talked about finance, is that educational aspect. And they're a prime location where if you're bringing in renewable solutions, new technologies, that you can actually showcase that as a community and demonstrate that, if we're moving away from gas heating and transitioning to electrification, that's going to go into the housing and that's going to go into the kind of local communities, and they do operate differently. And I think one of the key things is really getting that awareness and that education out there so people use it the more efficiently and they use it in the correct way. And I think from that point as well, if you've got something in the local community and within a school setting, our younger generation are so switched on to the climate change agenda. And it's quite unfortunate that they've got to carry that worry with them, and we're seeing them carry that worry now, and it's becoming a bit of an issue that is probably going to be something that we're going to have to deal with as well. So for me, if we can demonstrate to them that we're putting technologies in that they can actually see it firsthand and it's making a difference, not only will it raise their understanding and give them foresight in terms of career choices going forward, it'll allow them to see that change is happening, and I think that's fundamentally important as well.
Just from a sort of private sector basis, I joined JLL about 20 years ago, and shortly after I joined, some of you will know Julia Hirigoyen. She was the CEO of UKGBC, so we bought her business upstream about 20 years ago. And this is in the context of me being a land and development surveyor agent. And then it was about 10 years ago, our UK CEO said, you no longer work for a real estate business, we're a technology business. So 20 years ago, we bought a sustainability business. 10 years ago, we bought heavily into technology. And all of us were thinking, well, this is really strange, a technology business. We're looking at our old iPhones and looking at our Dell laptops and thinking, right, okay, it doesn't really feel like a technology business. And of course, for a firm like JLL, we manage a lot of clients' real estate. And the technology platform that we invested in now is beginning to look at AI platforms, predictable building management. And we have to do that for our own net zero journey because of the Scope 3 emissions produced by the very people who we manage for. And when you begin to think about the student housing sector, looking at behaviours there, I can tell you that 75% of students have no idea how much energy they use, and most of them maintain the heating within their rooms above 20 degrees, and 85% of them cool it down by opening the window. And we found out a lot of this through some of the management of the tools that we produce. And of course, it's really important when you look at, in that particular space of living asset classes, that the landlord pays for the power, the heat and the power. So if you can control and contain the energy usage within the building, then obviously the capex and fixed costs go down. So we've really noticed with the likes of Legal & General and Aviva, particularly in the affordable housing sector, looking to try and decarbonise first generation housing stock and student accommodation. But really, that money coming into the sector to try and make a difference and decarbonise is really important. But it is looking at the behaviours of students particularly, but also measuring, managing, reducing, using AI to shut down certain parts of the building. Over Christmas, 10% of all student apartments are still maintained 20 degrees, and they're vacant. So it's really coming down to measuring and then managing.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to shake these questions around a bit because we're going off scope with some of these, which is great. We'll skip a few. One of the questions posed was a very simple question of what presents a significant challenge to your organisation in your decarbonisation efforts. So it was a multiple choice question that we put out. I'll not do high or low with this one, we'll go with it. 80% of those questioned indicated a lack of funding within their main challenges. That's I don't think anyone would particularly disagree from the conversations we've had. But as we've discussed, it's not simply about that funding. It's about understanding the money that we have and making a plan and having allowances around that. Some of the other key priorities that they listed as well was complexity of estate, which we've discussed, and perceived cost of decarbonisation. So a lot of what we find in sort of speaking to public sector clients about, we've got multiple different solutions to help the public sector to quickly procure the right people to move their projects forward. Constantly coming across stumbling blocks of, well, we've got some money, we need to spend it quick. Oh, but that money doesn't really cover what we need it to cover. We don't really understand fully what it is. Once we've got into it, actually, the costs are going to mean that there's downstream costs of this which we can't justify. There's such a disjointed sort of approach to moving quickly and being able to move quickly is constantly what we're seeing all the time anyway from a Pagabo perspective. So I think just trying to bring in and leverage that digital type conversation. Yes, funding's one thing, and I think we've discussed quite a bit of that, but how dealing with complex estates, how can we use digital, how do we use technology to help the public sector to understand their massively sprawling estates, bringing in that kind of sectorisation of education and commercial and housing. How do we use all of that to get to a point where we understand our estate and we can confidently say, this is the right thing to do, this is the right thing to spend our capital budgets on, this is the right place to ask for funding, and actually have a plan to drive it forward? What role can digital play within that?
I touched on it on the previous point, really, and I think the first thing is to measure it, because everybody talks about we can't afford to do it, and you can reply to that with you can't afford not to. And again, just looking at the student housing sector, what a lot of the clients look at is the cost of decarbonisation and retrofitting, but they forget to deduct the savings. So if you take the savings out, then the maths looks a little bit different. And the key issue why they're doing it at all, well, when you look at the resilience of the asset and you look at future liquidity and assets stranding, 75% of the investors who invest in living, sustainability is one of their core criteria about whether they will buy or not buy, and whether they will invest. And quite a few of them might be in for 10 or 15 years. So they're really concerned by 2035, 2040, what's the liquidity of that asset? So it's probably expensive to do it, but I would argue that you can't afford to not do it, but deduct the savings before you look at the bottom line.
I think in terms of digitalisation and AI, that's a strategy in itself, kind of within local authorities, within the public sector, with in private sector as well. And I think we're going to see what we've seen in the last couple of years. Progress is going to be in a different place in 5-10 years' time. It's quite frightening to think of where it's going to be. But I think one of the key things that customers really could focus in on is that data element. It's around getting some really good metering data and having sub-meters in so you can actually see what your energy is coming from, not just in terms of the buildings using X amount of energy, but it's driven by the light and it's driven by the heat and it's driven by this. That's where you can make informed decisions for investment in terms of where you want to improve things. And I think where you do that, the savings that you make, you can use them savings and put it into a bit of a recycle pot to use that investment to develop plans to progress the rest of your estate. So I think there's definitely opportunities to, and I think one of the key things, yes, sometimes when you're looking at decarbonisation, it will cost more at the front end without a shadow of a doubt. But sometimes the long-term benefits aren't considered, and you've got to look at the whole life cost benefit of that, but also the codependencies. As an organisation, across the public sector, you're looking at health and well-being, you're looking at biodiversity, you're looking at kind of active and sustainable travel. And a lot of things that you do around decarbonisation, whether it be adaptation and mitigation, there's a lot of core benefits that if you could put a weight into it, would really justify that additional upfront investment.
Yeah, I think as well, as you've sort of both said, we need the data in place. The worst thing to do is, I suppose, do nothing. The more we do and the quicker we do it, the more data we'll have. And the plan, like we're sort of saying, it needs to be longer term. If you look at the savings over the future, next 10, 25 years, the numbers are, like you say, it's cheaper. You can't afford not to do it, and it's only going to become more expensive the longer you leave it. That's how I think we see it.
So I'm always just dying to get things done, as you can probably tell. And I guess there's a question where you've got smart AI and data, and do you have to go through the whole estate and do all the work with that? Or can you do something where you recognize a certain building types and you feed that into your engine and it can actually start to work, basically a program through and extrapolate that? So rather than spend, again, your 5 years doing the state's plan and working it all out and then things have moved and changed over that period of time, just start to do it and get on and do it. And recognizing, it's not perfect because I know everyone likes to have the contract and have them hammer down to a fixed price and they're going to do X, Y, and Z, but there's new ways, or there's not news, it's been there for a long time, but there's ways of having, someone on board, a partnership, multi-skilled, that can actually go through the state. And you might get to the end and it might not all be done, but actually things might change so much over that period of time and you'll have worked with them, you'll have built all the trust. So I think, we need to start thinking about new ways to use the data and to get it to actually, do some of the extrapolation.
So I'm going to give an example from yesterday at another talk that I was at, and please don't think that I'm in any way an expert on AI, because I'm not. I'm just quoting what I heard. But to your point, Ian, in this example, they were talking about using AI to drive down energy consumption within buildings. And the panel general consensus was that there was between 10 and 30% of energy usage within a building could be driven out just through better management of the system. Now, to your point, though, one of the examples given was using AI to assess how the building was being used in the first place, and that was through swipe card entry, through PIR sensors within the building. So in other words, it was using pretty crude data to build up a picture of how the building was being used and then sort of tailor a system around that. I think the only concern I would have about that is, to your point around data, I would say a significant portion of our estate, somebody has to go out, go up a step ladder, read a meter to know how much energy is being used in a particular building. So our newer estate, of course, will have BMS systems, and you can wire it all together. But I think that's a critical starting point for us, is just trying to get that baseline data, and it may not be as granular as saying that we've got sub-meters in different areas, but even to understand, across a 12-month period, what are the peaks and troughs. But I do think there is a business case there to be made for that reinvestment. I think the difficulty is for a lot of local authorities, in the absence of that plan, it becomes a saving. So that saving then gets, eaten up by the cuts that need to be made this year, rather than what should happen is it should be ring-fenced into a pot that we then reinvest. So I go back to the lighting system in our headquarters, a 300 grand saving every year, and okay, there's a 9-year or 10-year payback period for the initial capital, but we should then be using that to reinvest across the estate. That's partly my job, is to try and force that home. But I am very conscious that we need a plan for a lot of these estates in order to, because I am very conscious that local authorities can probably leverage in funding in a way that private sector just simply can't. We can borrow at a cheaper rate. So there's opportunities there which are probably in some respects easier for local authorities, but you need to have that business plan to make it sustainable into the future.
I think just probably to finish that point and really to reinforce what everyone said, it always amazes us with customers how little they know about their buildings. And I think as contractors, we probably need to carry the responsibility for that because of perhaps the way the building's been handed over and left in terms of maintenance and that kind of thing. But when we get the opportunity to work with a customer from day one, data is the most important part of that. And it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be AI even. It just has to be that base data about your building. And you can get that through the proper and thorough survey work that you can do and all that sort of thing. That's where you should start, absolutely, to get your strategy right.
It was about 12 years ago. I went into the office one morning and there was something that looked like an extra fire alarm stuck on the ceiling. And I had this little device underneath my desk, which I thought was a little bit weird because it looked like a camera. And stick with it. 12 years later, JLL produces a product called Hank, which is an AI building maintenance product. And we use it throughout all of our buildings. So the stuff that we stuck on the ceiling and under the desks 15 years ago was measuring occupation of desks. It was shutting down different parts of the building and encouraging people to go and sit somewhere where there were more people sat. So probably, a better environment to work. And, today, this Hank product, it now predicts a management regime for a building. And it looks at servicing or replacement and the entire efficiency of real estate, which obviously, for our clients, there's an enormous amount of energy being spent and invested. When life is fiscally more challenging, it's a key area to try and save some investment into other projects. So I know I keep on banging on about it, but I think just measuring it, looking and understanding how your real estate does operate is critical.
Just probably one final point. Prior to kind of where I work now, I spent 22 years in the public sector, so fully understand some of the complexities. And I would say for the start point, which done many years ago, is you can get a lot of your data from your energy provider in an Excel format. And if you get that Excel format, you can actually have the data and you can aggregate it up to see what your building's doing. You can use that information then to just prioritise and see who are your top consuming buildings. And 9 times out of 10, and I done this and it was over 200 buildings, there was 10 buildings that we needed to focus in on that was going to have the biggest impact. So as a start point, you don't need to go into that granularity, just using that high level data to understand and say, that first of all, that the buildings are running on actual reads and not estimate reads, because that could be something, again, that's a bit of a challenge, and that you need to maybe have a bit of a metering strategy around that. But just getting that data and prioritising it, you'll tend to find in local authorities, it'll be your leisure buildings, it'll be your civic buildings are at the top, and then there's them lower line buildings that aren't having as big an impact, but are still part of that journey towards net zero. But it's these ones at the very top that you can then go in and get that granularity on and really put that focus in on.
Just a quick final point on data and what everyone said, the importance of using it to identify the buildings in the estate. I think also you've got actually after project completion using that as a really key way to highlight as a case study, highlighting the carbon savings, for instance, to then build on that and use that as a clear way to invest further in estate improvement, decarbonisation.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to move on to one final question and invite comments and thoughts from the room as well, and then we'll move on to questions from the room too. So from a procurement and supply chain perspective, being quite selfish, I guess. We are procurement. We had to get there eventually. Our survey asked at what point our public sector colleagues are involved in procurement in the decarbonisation effort. What role do they play within there? Is it a case that they're involved in strategy building? Do they understand the strategy? Do they understand what the goals are? Or is it more of a transactional aspect of this is the scope, this is the spec, we need an open procurement process, we need some quotes for this? A significant proportion was the latter, unfortunately. So comments, thoughts on that. What can we do better? Where can we... Are there any opinions other than procurement should be involved at the beginning? It shouldn't be the case that we're asking for 3 quotes and everything and doing that at the very end. What role can procurement really play within this and involve in our supply chain partners? Very much see early contractor involvement, early consultant involvement as part of that procurement process. What can we do better?
We had this conversation, I think, didn't we, the other day? I think the projects where we've been involved in PSDS funding bids, for example, we get involved right at the beginning and we can add value. And then we get to the point where the money's been won and it has to go to procurement. And And whilst we completely understand and wouldn't want public sector money not to be scrutinised, because that's very important, it's our money that's being spent, often I find in the public sector that the gateways that you put in for scrutiny probably take more time and cost as much money as they are saving, I would suggest. I don't know, maybe the public sector can comment on that. But I think maybe removing some of those barriers, allowing the early contractor involvement from across the supply chain, not just the main contractor, but the design teams and the subcontractors as well, can only improve a project from our experience.
Is this one on? Oh, yes, it is. Great. I think, obviously procurement's often just hailed in the public sector as a constant barrier and an impediment to getting the job done. I think there are some more interesting ways that we're starting to look at procurement now. For example, competitive dialogue. So bringing you in as contractors throughout the process, rather than just one one public sector decarbonisation scheme project. Look at a project portfolio. Have a competitive dialogue process where all of the contractors are actually participating in that process, so we get to a point of comfort where we can actually select a partner that's going to do the program with us. And you've all had an opportunity to feed into that process as opposed to it being one isolated procurement after another. I'm looking at Aberdeen now. Do you have an appetite for it?
So I was going to come in on that one actually, Justin. So I would say yes. Like we've actually got a shared procurement service across 3 local authorities, which I'm going to say has led to a slightly broader approach, and more recently, and I can't go into the detail because it hasn't quite been announced yet, but we've gone through a procurement exercise for an EV partner to support us across 4 local authorities, which is, I'm going to say, the top half of Scotland. And the principle there is it's a commercial partner to come on board to take our existing infrastructure, fold that into an expanded programme, partly funded by Scottish Government, but also with that private sector capital to grow a network which will be operated by a private company, but partly on behalf of the public sector. I think it's been a far better way of approaching this. So it wasn't a tender in the sense that we gave some very broad outlines as to what was expected, and then it was a competitive dialogue effectively with a number of partners who were whittled down. So I think from our perspective, anything that reduces the burden in terms of procurement, we'd certainly welcome. And I do think, going back to the very first point that we made, we quite often don't have the skill set. So we are reliant on partners coming in and providing us with some of that support. How we join those dots quite yet, I don't know, because at the end of the day, as you said, there is a procurement, there is money being spent. But I think there has to be a better way of doing it, and certainly we'd be more than willing to try.
I think, again, fairly selfishly to jump in, but procurement is it's difficult in public sector, and especially when there's so many, I suppose, limitations on the funding and the scope of the projects. And it's obviously our goal is to make it as easy as possible, and hopefully what we are trying to do is carry out those checks and the scrutiny earlier in the process. When your contractors and consultants can get involved earlier, it saves time, it saves money. There's projects that I suppose they fall down because we've left it too late. I suppose we've got the funding, it's not necessarily enough, and then the project doesn't go ahead. And obviously contractors are bidding, they're spending time, and resource to sort of price these things, and they've got to make it up somewhere. So your next bid might come in, it might be a little more expensive, and it's a bit of a vicious cycle. But yeah, that's what we need to try and do, just cut down those barriers. Hopefully people go a bit more direct. Hopefully there's less competitions, although, frameworks can help to still add that level of scrutiny in there.
I think there's a few strands in terms of it. From experience, I've sat on both sides as a customer and as on the other side now, and there's definitely a sweet spot in the middle where things fall down, and I think it really aligns itself to bringing everybody, all the kind of strategic people who are looking at this as a collective early on. So you're bringing your consultants together, you're bringing your contractors together, so you're getting a true understanding of cost viability, the solutions, and the actual programme as much as so the more information you can get, it helps bridge that thing where, and I know probably Steelix has seen this, where you put an application in, and then you go from rebus stage to the next rebus stage, and then hold on, we need additional money for that. We didn't factor that in. We didn't factor that in. And then in many cases that becomes unviable because that additional money hasn't been kind of put forward to your capital kind of for your capital requests. And your budgets are set well in advance, so you've got to go there and go back and kind of say, have we got any money, at a time where for the last 10 years plus we've gone through austerity and the reserves are no longer the way that they were, and all of these additional things need to be factored in. So I think having that early engagement allows to bridge that gap. Nobody wants to go back to the leader of the council and say, we've got this extra amount of money to deliver something, but we haven't got the additional that we need to actually make the project happen. So getting that early insight and having absolute clarity early on around, there'll always be subject to change, and that's why you kind of bring contingency in, but there's always going to be that element of the more accurate you are, the more likely that project will actually transition to delivery. And I think I've seen that a lot of the time, and I think from the procurement perspective, finally, some of that's just about internal education. We've always done it a certain way, and it's just, that's how it's always been done. And I think it's just raising that understanding and awareness that the kind of using frameworks is absolutely fine. They've gone through the due diligence, they've gone through all the relevant checks. It's just taking that first stage away from you, and you're moving into basically that second stage. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think it's again around that education.
Would like to think so. Let's pray. Let's hope. Was there any comments around the room on that point at all?
Sorry, no, it's unrelated. It's unrelated to what was just being said. But I did have a question. Is it okay to ask that? Yes. I'm Michael. I'm from Salix Finance. I was at a session yesterday on circular economy, which was about reusing things, and it talked about reusing buildings, reusing materials, and I just wondered if anyone on the panel, because we've talked a lot about decarbonisation, but something that we haven't talked about is the actual reuse of buildings. David talked about in the Granite City having a lot of Victorian schools, so I just wondered, does anyone on the panel have any thoughts on decarbonisation, but also being able to do that hand in hand with reusing buildings and reusing materials?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think we're seeing that coming through. Definitely, we want to see that whole circular economy approach. We want to see that recycle, repurpose, reuse philosophy come through. Some of the projects that we've done has been driven by customers asking for that specifically, where we've repurposed steel within the buildings. So I think, again, it's that awareness of what we can do, what's achievable, and asking the contractor, we've got a real strong mandate around, the sustainability agenda, and we want to look at where we can use products and materials that exist out there already for the embodied carbon aspect of it as well, because there's a lot more knowledge around the embodied carbon requirements now as well, whereas beforehand it was very much operational. We're seeing that transition to everybody's asking for that whole collective of operational and embodied. So my answer is absolutely yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose just to echo it, because you mentioned Aberdeen, and for my sins, I'm also the head of planning in CERT Booze and Hisses. But that's fundamental to what we're trying to achieve. And I'm in the strange position that my elected members many years ago introduced a granite policy, so a policy to maintain our granite buildings. But yes, I think I was at the Connected Places Catapult yesterday for the launch of Historic England's investment prospectus around buildings up and down the UK. They've identified, I think, about between 550 and 650,000 homes could go into what are effectively derelict buildings up and down the UK. I think there's a acceptance that there's still a lot of work required, particularly around taxation. So, as an example, greenfield sites are taxed very differently to brownfield and regeneration projects. But I think there's massive opportunities there, particularly when those buildings are already in established communities and how they can be reused. But there are costs associated with them, which are unfortunately quite often abnormal in terms of greenfield, and they introduce a risk factor, which, you know, when you're talking about optimism bias of maybe 30% for particularly complex sites, it does add. It adds a complexity just to the economics of making them stack up.
Yeah, I think it's something like 80% of all buildings that will occupy by 2050 are already built. In the CBD in Paris, there's a presumption to retain a building unless it's got asbestos, hazardous materials, or structurally unsafe, and beginning to see London boroughs, Westminster particularly, looking to preserve buildings. So certainly, you know, with some of the advice that we're looking at with regional offices or slightly obsolete offices across London, looking at how we can repurpose those buildings, that's the go-to. But there's some real challenges on whether some of those existing floor plates, layouts can work. You know, particularly for residential, if it's a deep floor plan, to try and get light into a building, so not everything works. And I've been involved in a few buildings where we've bolted on, not that I had anything to do with it, but bolting on extra space around the outside to increase the footprint where it was actually too shallow. So there's a real sense of just trying to look at the existing building and repurpose them. And, you know, I really applaud that. I think, you know, we've got to do it, but not every building will work.
Excellent, thanks for that. Any other questions? We've got time probably for one more quick question. I'll be a runner. Ben, come on, Ben.
Good morning. Mark Burrows from Robertson Group. I'm quite happy with the round table. I think you brought some really good stuff. I think we recognise that investment gap. We recognise the need for skills. Do you think the round table, and I think the rest of it in the room, the learned room here, we've got the narrative completely wrong? Because in theory, we're not. I think there's not a lot of confidence that we're going to hit those targets at the moment. We're kind of not quite succeeding as much as we should. Have we got the narrative wrong? Because I think we're all in the minority, being an energy or a regeneration type professional. We've got to excite the kids. We've got to get those students doing what they want to do, but they're not doing it. So have we got to... Is the word net zero wrong? Is the word decarbonisation wrong? Is sustainability too complex? When we mix all three together, when we say carbon net zero, do we get that wrong? That's my question.
I think perhaps not answering the question, but agreeing with you a little bit is, I've sat on a couple of roundtables in the last few days. I've been involved in construction for some years. I'm not going to share how many. And we've talked about the same problems for as long as I can remember, which is a skill shortage, which is a problem with collaboration and not getting early contractor involvement. And you can go back all the way to Latham and Egan and all of those early reports about our industry. And we talk about problems, and it would be really nice to talk about solutions and to talk about good practice and to talk about case studies of where we've been successful, because there are lots of those as well happening, and I think we need to share more of those and focus on the positive. I'm a chair of a Constructing Excellence Club in Manchester, and that's what we aim to do. We aim to share the good practice and share what people are doing, and you've given some really good examples of the private sector today. I think we need to get more of that out there. And just a kind of thought on kind of the reuse and decarbonisation concept. When we first started talking about the buzzword of decarbonisation a couple of years ago, I went to my boss to talk to him about it, and he said, well, that's just what we do, isn't it? Because we re-roof and we refurbish and we fit out and we extend and we make a building useful for someone for a longer period of time, and we make it more energy efficient just by the very nature of improving it. That's just what we do. And it would be really good to normalise that a little bit, I think.
I kind of tend to agree with you in terms of the question around language, and I do think sometimes we overcomplicate things. I think we do make, if I say, what do you do? I do decomp. Well, what's that? And that is sometimes the narrative that I get back. And it goes back to exactly what you've just said around, we've been doing this for years. The way that I explain it and you know, do many kind of conversations and talks is your grandmother was doing it. You know, when she was putting the sausage dog in front of the door to save the energy and keep the heat in. And then she went to double glazing, she was doing it. And then she put LED in, she was doing it. And then she really revolutionised and put some PV on her roof. She's decarbonised her house. And it's putting it in a way that is meaningful to people and that it's relatable to people. So I think language is key to that, and we need to simplify it, because you know, you're talking around climate change, net zero, sustainability, decarbonisation. What on earth does it all mean? And it becomes overwhelming. And if somebody asks around, you know, carbon neutral, net zero carbon, you know, kind of carbon positive, carbon negative, there's just so many complexities for people. We just need to standardise it, simplify it, and make it easier to understand.
Really quick response on that, everybody used to talk about chasing a green premium. And actually, I've never really agreed with that. I think it's talk about a brown discount. What's the discount? What's the future capex? What's the management of the building? I think the premium it's not a premium, it's the value. It's the value of an asset, of a resilient asset. And anything which isn't resilient is discounted. So that's probably one of the biggest, you know, narrative changes for me, that a good building, everybody used to talk about location, location, location. And it's actually location still first, then it's specification, and then it's sustainability and resilience. So the narrative is different from my perspective. And when we talk to investors, they're looking for those three: location, specification, and resilience.
Excellent. Very good closing point. Thank you very much. So it's all dead easy, right? We've all got a plan. We're all heading in the right direction. Not quite, but we'll get there. Excellent. I just want to say thank you to our panel. Really good conversations, excellent points, giving us lots of additional things to think about in our white paper. But we'll be back to you all soon on that as well. Thanks to everyone around the room for coming, participating. We'd love to speak to anyone in our public sector colleagues about how we can support these projects and our green initiatives and our decarbonisation efforts from a procurement perspective as well. So there's a few of us, either branded or not, around the room to happily speak to you about that. And thank you very much.